Welcome to the Mono Beginner Crash Course. In this session we will be looking at how to make assets using Blender. First we will look at getting around the Blender app, then we'll look at navigating the viewport, before looking at common tools you can use to create assets. We will finish with a time lapse of creating some of the assets for our target space. Assets are usually made in an external application such as Blender, Maya, or 3D Studio Max, alongside many other applications. Blender is a great starting point as it is free and has fantastic resources online to learn. As Blender can do so much, there is a lot to it, and can be quite intimidating for new users. That said, you only need certain sections to create cool assets. At the very top, you have your menu items, but also a bunch of tabs. The tabs are just different layouts that allow you to focus on a particular task. Creating assets is usually in layout or modeling. You may need UV editing and shading later in the process. Let's stick to layout for now. This area is the viewport, where we will be creating your assets. Use middle click to orbit, shift and middle click to pan, middle scroll to zoom, and alt middle click to snap to different views. You can also adjust the view by the axis at the top right. At the top left of the viewport, we have the mode you are working in. The two most common are Object and Edit. You can bounce between these two using the Tab key. This was one of the bigger differences from other 3D creation tools, where you have to go into the Edit mode in order to affect the polygons, edges, and vertices of the asset. Object mode is more like arranging the scene itself. Next to that, you have a number of menus, depending on the mode you are in, as well as the transform orientation, pivot point, snap settings, and proportional editing tools. Under those, we have the asset creation tools such as position, rotation, and scale, as well as other tools such as Extrude, Inset, and Bevel, to name a few. As with any application, it is a good practice to get into using the hotkeys. Blender is no exception. Most hotkeys are displayed when you roll over the tool itself. The best ones to start with are G for position, R for rotation, and S for scale. After that, you could use X, Y, or Z to limit the change to one axis. Once done, left click or press space to lock the edit in, or right click to reset. As an example, select the asset, G to move, X to align to the X axis, and left click or space to set. At the bottom left, you also have a panel you can use to adjust manually. At the top right of the viewport, we only need to worry about the overlays pull down, X-ray mode, and viewport shading options. You will need to use the X-ray mode to select elements on the other side of an asset. If you don't, you will only select the visible elements in the viewport. The viewport shading options change how the viewport looks, such as wireframe, solid, material preview, and rendered. Usually though, for asset creation, wireframe and solid are all you need. Right next to that is a little arrow that you can select, which will open certain toolbars. Pressing N will also open this. The main one for now is the item at the top. Over to the right, we have your outliner, which organizes your assets in the hierarchy. To better organize your hierarchy, rename assets with a double click. Under that, we have the properties section. This has a long list of categories we can use, but the main ones for asset creation are object properties, modifier properties, object data properties, and material properties. We will get into those as we need them. Let's look at actually editing meshes. First, let's make a duplicate using Shift D, not Control D. This will create a copy that you can use the XYZ keys to move as you see fit. Most of these hotkeys are in the menus above, but it's a good idea to learn the hotkeys for the most common actions. Select the asset or assets you want to edit. You can hold Shift to select multiple assets, and use the Delete key to delete, and go to Edit mode by selecting the mode or pressing the tab. You can change the selection type by using the buttons at the top here to edit the vertices, edges, or polygons. You can also use 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard to jump between them. These would probably be the second most important hotkeys to learn. You can merge vertices by using Shift to select multiple vertices, right-clicking, and then go down to Merge Vertices. If you choose the vertices in order, you get quite a few options to choose from, and are pretty self-explanatory. At last, at center, and at first are pretty common uses. It is easy to separate polygons into their own model by selecting the polygons you would like to separate, right-click, and select Separate Selection. Use Split instead if you want to separate the mesh but keep it in the same object. You can delete just elements, such as vertices, edges, or polygons, without deleting the polygons overall by pressing the Delete key, and then selecting Dissolve, Vertices, Edges, or Polygons. This is very useful when you are cleaning up your asset poly count. If you use delete vertex, edge, or polygon, you will remove it completely and sometimes leave other elements behind. This works with vertices and polygons as well. You can create faces between two edges using the Bridge tool. Select the two edges you would like to create a polygon between, right-click, and select Bridge Edge Loops. It is a good idea to apply transforms to your asset. There are a couple of reasons for this, but one key one is that the scale of assets plays a big part in the game engine. You will most likely want your asset in Blender to be the same size in Unity, and to reduce issues with scale, you can apply the transforms, scale in particular. In Blender, you can do this in object mode with the hotkey Ctrl-A and select Scale. This will also affect how you use some of the tools that we'll be looking at in a second. For example, if you use Inset without Apply Transform, they will be different widths, but after the transform has been applied, the scale will be correct. With that, you can start creating assets. Select the element you want to edit and position, rotate, or scale them as you see fit. Make sure to remember the hotkeys we've looked at so far to help speed up your creation process. You will use them a lot, so getting comfortable with them early will save you a lot of time. With the basics down, let's look at editing the mesh in detail with some of the tools found at the left. We'll go over the most common aspects of each. Feel free to look at other options available as you go. The Extrude tool, or the E key, allows you to grab an element, such as a polygon or edge, and extrude it in or out. Tools with a triangle at the bottom right of the button have a number of options. Just click and hold and select the tool you would like. You can hold over the tool to get more information on each. Extrude region, extrude along normals, and extrude individual are good ones to start with. If you open the tab at the bottom after using it, you can modify the details directly if need be. Inset, or the I key, allows you to add polygons within a polygon. Use the panel below to adjust for things like individual polygons. Bevel, or Ctrl-B, not just B, will make this current selection items beveled. Use the panel below to adjust elements like the number of edges in the bevel or the shape. Loop Cut, or Ctrl-R, allows you to add a loop along polygons. A loop is a group of edges along a mesh, and getting comfortable creating good clean loops allows you to speed up your process as you can select entire loops using Alt-click. If you use the hotkey to add a loop cut, you can easily add a number of loops using the scroll button. When you left-click, you can slide those loops along the mesh, and then left-click to apply or right-click to reset to the middle again. The Knife tool, or K, allows you to cut into the mesh and put edges where you see fit. Press space to end the process. Pay attention to placement though. Cutting near the edge will add more polygons than if you cut to the edge. And as noted, the poly count in WebGL spaces is important. The Bisect tool is under the Knife tool button. This allows you to select the polygons you want to cut and then use a straight line to bisect them. You can use Control to make it a straight angle to the viewport. Control is used to snap a number of elements such as move, rotation, and scale. Blender has a number of useful add-ons that help with the creation process. The Blender community also has a lot of free or paid add-ons that help improve or speed up how you make and use your assets. Two add-ons that I recommend that are included in the base version of Blender are the Mesh F2 and Mesh Loop Tools add-ons. To add a Blender add-on, simply go to the Edit Preferences menu item, then select the Add-ons tab to the left. In the search at the top, type in F2 and check the toggle to the left of the details. After that, search for Loop Tools, one word, and do the same. For more information on either, go to the documentation linked in the details. Once done, it is now much easier to close loops with the F key, among other things, as well as set a number of vertices to a circle by right-clicking in the edit mode and using Circle, alongside other useful tools. As we are using a game engine, we need to consider certain things about our assets. One of the main ones is that game engines use a one-sided shader by default. A shader is just the code that tells a material how it looks in the viewport. In this case, one side is solid, and the other side is invisible. There are ways around this, but it costs performance, so it is generally not recommended. One of the tools in Blender for this process is the Face Orientation toggle in the Overlays panel. With this tool on, blue is the solid side, and red is the invisible side. You can flip polygons by going to Edit Mode, select the polygons, and go to the Mesh menu, Normals, and Flip. it is recommended to use the FBX file format for use in Unity. Unity does support .blend and .obj, but these are not as good due to file size, complications, or features. .glb is also an option, but Unity does not import this format by default and would require plugins to do so. While we're at it, recommended image formats include .png or JPEG. In Blender, you can easily export your asset by selecting the assets you want to export and going to File, Export, .fbx. Other applications have a similar approach. Make sure to select the Selected Objects toggle, and if your asset is not animated or rigged with bones, use the Apply Transform toggle as well. This will reduce other scale issues within Unity. With the tools discussed, you could very much create many asset types such as buildings, furniture, and props for your space. Of course, there are many other techniques that we will cover in a future series, but these tools are more than enough to get things started. From here we will look at a time-lapse with commentary for some of the assets made for our first space. The full video will also be available in the links below. First I focus on the building itself. I'm going for a small room environment, as this will help keep the resources down for the first space. Creating game assets is always a balance between quality versus performance versus deadlines. I found that a 10 by 10 by 5 meter space is a good minimum space, as any smaller and the camera in Mona gets a little troublesome. Of course, make the space as you like. Change the windows, add some detail, whatever works for you. Note how I created a new project and tested the size of the space early on. As Mona is so easy to get into the space and testing with the playground, it's a great idea to jump in and test the space regularly to get a feel for it. When you update the assets in the space, the assets update automatically, which is fantastic for quick iterations. After that, I start building the furniture. The furniture assets will be made available in the Mona library if you want to use them to get started faster. But these assets are made in much the same way as the space using the tools discussed in the tutorial. In this case, I start looking at dimensions or reference, so I can get a good idea of how big this should be. I found that this is very useful in regards to things like furniture or props around an environment to get something sort of a bit more realistic to the character that we've got. Generally, I do find that the avatar is relatively accurate to a human, so it kind of works out. I do use a couple of extra tools in this just to speed things up. So you'll notice that I added a mirror modifier that allows you to mirror any asset across an axis. So you only have to do it on one side. That way I can speed the whole process up. And in the end, I make sure that I get rid of the extra polygons in the middle because those are not needed. A lot of the assets here just use simple bevel examples, adding a couple of extra lines. Once again, not using too many because I want to keep the poly count low. If the asset is more important, you can add more. If it is going to be in the background, you can probably get away with less. There are two main axes across a space. One is global, where everything is sort of up, down, left, and right. And local is what the assets up, down, left, and right is. So sometimes if you rotate an asset but still want to function on a sort of up and down from the original, you can use a local axis. This can be found at the top. Every designer generally has a different approach to it. Some people will concept their assets, some people will use reference. Now you can use AI from Midjourney or anything like that in regards to getting concept art that you want to use to build, and in some cases can build it for you. But for the most part, there's no one way to do it. Whatever works for you, at the speed that you prefer, once you know the technical skills on how to do it. Here you can see that I move on to sort of like an ottoman, adjusting the size, but keeping the style of the original, so basically using some of the original. So that's a good way to save time. There's a technique called kit bashing, which studios will use to sort of reuse parts or sometimes all of the same pieces in order to make things a lot faster. Last thing I will do is clean up the polygons, separate the objects, and then reset the transforms in the center so the pivot of the asset is in the center. That way I can use the asset in Unity in a little easier, so rotate from the center or move it around as expected. Your first assets most likely won't look how you want as you start getting used to the tools, but over time you will get better at the toolset and learn how to improve your work, from using reference and concepting, and simply getting more comfortable with the techniques that work for you. So in this tutorial we went over navigating Blender and its tools to create 3D assets. We then looked at a time-lapse of taking those skills to create real assets to use in a Mona space, such as a room, sofa, and ottoman. Of course, there are many ways to make assets, and many of those techniques can be found in the many resources available to you in the Mona docs and the Mona YouTube channel, such as workshops and other tutorials. Make sure to jump in the Discord too to hang out with other creators and ask any questions you may have. Links down below. In the next tutorial, we will look at setting up materials and unwrapping UVs in Blender to take our assets even further. Thanks for watching, and happy building!